ASMR Who, and today we are reaching sort of the final stretch of the Big Finish main range journey for now, because I think I'm going to take a bit of a break when we hit number 50 and then see where we go. So we're almost there. Today we're talking about releases 43 through to 46. These are a really interesting batch of stories here, 4 stories that are unlike any other stories, certainly that I have, listened to or watched, or all 4 of these have something unique and different about them, which is very exciting. So let's crack on. Starting with Doctor Who and the Pirates, or The Lass That Lost a Sailor. This is written by Jacqueline Rayner, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just check that. Yes, Jacqueline Rayner. And the sort of thing that is notable about this one, the thing I knew going in, is that it is a musical story. It's got songs in it. Specifically, they are sort of not necessarily parodies, but they are plays on songs from 2 musicals, one of which being The Pirates of Penzance, and the other one I can't recall off the top of my head. I don't know. But it's sort of a mashup of those 2 in terms of the songs. So, for example, the song I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General, which is from The Pirates of Penzance, I believe, becomes I Am the Very Model of a Gallifreyan buccaneer, and it's the Doctor's song that he sings. So that's very fun. You've got Bill Oddie as the main pirate baddie, Red Jasper, and he's clearly having a lot of fun. But the other really interesting thing about this story, and I didn't know this going in, is that they're a framing device, and that what sort of allows it to be a musical story, because the pirate story is a story being told by the Doctor and Evelyn in the past tense. They had that adventure and are recounting it to a young girl called Sally, young woman called Sally, who's a student at where Evelyn teaches, and it's not clear why they're telling her this story initially. It starts out with just Evelyn, and then the Doctor shows up. But in trying to tell the story, some of the details change. Some of the things that, they're like, oh, and then this happened, and they sort of come out of the story and go, well, no, that's silly, and what actually happened was a bit different. And then, it becomes a musical later on, in about part 3, I think it is when the songs start coming in. Part 2, or I think it's part 3, because one of the cliffhangers, I think it's the cliffhanger to part 2, is Evelyn going, oh no, you're going to sing to the Doctor. Like, that's the cliffhanger. The Doctor's going to sing a song, which is very fun. But the reason as to why they're telling Sally, the character, this story, as I say, is not entirely clear, and it's revealed, at the end of as the story goes on. It's a very mature thing, and it's good because it's the kind of mature, like sometimes in the main range so far I've found with stories like Necromantia or The Rapture, for example, that they're stories that do mature things that you just wouldn't do in the TV show. You never get away with it. And I really like The Rapture, but you wouldn't tell that story on TV. And you certainly wouldn't do Necromantia. But there's a maturity there, but I think you could do this on TV. Not least because there's kind of a story should go and find out for yourself if you haven't listened to this story, because it is really good. But yeah, this one really worked for me, and I was very glad that I didn't know about the framing device of it, because that is kind of half of the fun of going, like, why are they telling this person this story? What is going on there? Why is she the way she is? And she's clearly very upset about something, and yeah, it was a really fun revelation, and it's fun because it kind of makes the pirate story almost a B plot in the end. It kind of doesn't really matter, but I thought it was a masterful. It was really fun in the way, really impressive. I felt how it kind of starts off quite light-hearted, and it's clearly a heightened kind of pirate story, and Red Jasper's got 2 peg legs at the start, and he's like, oh, war, me hearties, and all, all the stereotypical pirate stuff. And then as it progresses, the threat becomes a lot more real, and yeah, he is this kind of cartoonish character, but he's dangerous, and bad things happen, but it never becomes depressing. It's a really great tightrope act that it walks, and I think it's a fantastic story. I really enjoyed it. Then, moving on to Creatures of Beauty, which is written by Nicholas Briggs, and this story is told non-chronologically. I think I was reading the notes after every story I listen to. I go and read about it, read the notes and the trivia and stuff on the wiki. Sometimes that can be because it's a case of, I didn't quite get this, so let's just clarify what happened there. Or oftentimes it's just a case of, I want to know more about the story. I want to know, what if it might be alluding to stuff. Some stories have been parodying certain things, and it's good to find out what those are if you're not familiar with them, and and find out why certain things are the way they are, for example. And in this, it was a case of the story is told. It's basically a case of the idea of it being non-chronological is about not having all the facts and not having the context and things appearing one way until you find out what actually happened, and it kind of changes your view of things. And so I think the cast recorded it in story order as their characters experienced it, but you hear it out of sequence. The very first scene is the Doctor and Nyssa in like a car on a vehicle, and they've escaped from this place, and they're going to something, and they're talking about, did we do the right thing, and can we trust this person? And then the next scene, Nyssa has been in prison, she's been arrested, and she's been interrogated, and the Doctor's nowhere to be seen. I felt that it was, I think once you get a hang of the fact that it's not told in order, it's quite impressive how I felt quite easy. I felt it was quite easy to keep track of what was going on and whereabouts in the story, in the narrative, this was. Which I think, especially on audio, when you like physical, visual cues, to guide people as to when exactly this scene is set. I felt it was done really well, where it was very clear when things were, and okay, this is before this bit, and this bit is later on, and that sort of thing. So I thought that was really good, and the it still manages to have interesting cliffhangers and such, even with that, which is, I felt it was an impressive sort of juggling of all the different bits and all the different scenes, and yeah, making it still feel cohesive and coherent enough to follow. I really like the ending of this one as well. It's it's not necessarily happy, but it's not. There's a kind of melancholy to it, you know. It ends on a note of the Doctor and Nyssa sort of leave, and they're like, I don't think we changed anything. I don't think we had any impact. But as we know, the audience, because we've had the whole context of everything that happened, we know that they did change things. They just don't know it. Because the whole story is about this planet where there was this massive sort of accident in the atmosphere, and it's kind of made the atmosphere sort of toxic, and people are deformed. But there are certain people who are beautiful, and that's abnormal, and those people are kind of treated as others and like alien spies almost. And it's interesting the way they use the characters in this story use the word beauty like it's a slur, like, oh, she is a beauty, but it's not in a nice way at all. Like that, I felt was really interesting, and the presentation of the story was really interesting as well. I had a lot of fun with this. A great story for the Fifth Doctor and Nyssa, who are not always my favourite TARDIS team. I've spoken about this. I don't always love Nyssa as a companion, but I thought she was good in this story. And I thought the Doctor was good in this as well. And so that was very fun and interesting. Next is Project Lazarus, which is written by Kevin Scott and Mark Wright. This is a sequel to Project Twilight, which I don't recall exactly which release that was, but there was somewhere in the 20s, I think 22, 23, something like that, which was about people being turned into vampires. And I don't recall exactly what happened. I think, is that the one where the Doctor sings Zagreus for the first time, the Zagreus rhyme? The only things you really need to know from that story, particularly, is that the character of Nimrod and the idea of the Forge, although I don't think the Forge were a massive part of that first story, but Nimrod as a sort of villainous presence certainly was. And there is a character, a returning character from that story, in this story, who I very vaguely remembered but didn't entirely recall. I imagine that these stories would feel much more connected if you listen to them sort of immediately one after the other. I can't imagine how this would be, at the time it was released, if you were just listening to the stories one a month. And there's a sequel to a story from 2 years ago that you don't really remember, unless you had re-listened to it recently. But this was decent. The interesting thing about this story, and you can see from the cover, is that it's got the 6th and the 7th Doctors in it, but it's not a multi-Doctor story. Well, it is and it isn't, in that the first 2 parts are the 6th Doctor and Evelyn, and they are very much following on from the events of Project Twilight. Not immediately, but they refer to the events of that story because they've experienced it. And then there's parts 3 and 4. The 7th Doctor comes in and kind of takes over the story, and it's a bit like the first Doctor story, the Ark, which is the story I've not seen, but from my understanding, parts 1 and 2 kind of exist, and then the characters leave, come back for parts 3 and 4, which are 100 years later, and it's basically a sequel to itself. That's what happens here. There's a whole what's going on here, because although the first half is the second half is the Seventh Doctor, there is interaction between the Sixth and the Seventh Doctors, but the Sixth Doctor's acting a bit off. He's a bit odd, and the Seventh Doctor doesn't remember any of what he's talking about. And so, I don't think it's a massive spoiler to say that it might not necessarily be the actual Sixth Doctor per se. It might be, but it might not be. But I did sort of figure out what was going on before it happened, but I felt it was very interesting, and the sort of twists and turns that it took were interesting. I don't know that I will. I know there is a third project Destiny, I think it is, which I might check out. I don't know. I have enjoyed the 2 project stories so far, Twilight and Lazarus, but I haven't loved them, I haven't adored them, so I might check that out, I might not, I don't know. But this one was fun. I would say possibly of these 4 that we're talking about today, my least favourite, but I did enjoy all of them. And the stuff that where this story leaves the Sixth Doctor and Evelyn, especially, is very interesting, I felt. And then finally is Flip Flop, which is written by Jonathan Morris. And this was another one that I was very intrigued about, because this is a story that is in essentially 2 halves. So it's still a 4-part story, but they're essentially two-part stories. And they can be listened to in either order. So the initial sort of CD release came with a black CD and a white CD, and you could just put whichever one in first. That is the same here in terms of the on the app, the audio app, is that you get 2. It basically gives you 2 options, black or white, and it plays the full thing. But if you go black, it does black then white, and if you go white, it does white then black. I did black and then white purely because that's on the app. That was the first one there, so I was like, sure, we'll go black then white. It would be interesting to listen to it the other way around, because the way you listen to the second one, the way you after listening to the first one, it impacts the way you listen to the second one, because essentially it's a time loop story, and you get to the end of the first, whichever one you pick, and you go, okay, I see what's going to happen then. It's essentially the same story twice, in the broad strokes, but it is about, I suppose it's kind of the difference of nature versus nurture, and things that the way things, the environment you've grown up in, and the way it impacts you. And it's about changing time, and you think that if you change one thing that things will change for the better, but maybe they won't. It's an interesting story. I'm not entirely sure it works. It's a bit weird in the way where it sort of leaves off the Doctor and Mel, because sort of, technically there's 2 of them at the end of this, in a way, but it was interesting, and part of the fun is just listening to the 2 of them and noticing references in the second one to stuff that happened in the first one, and realising stuff that was referenced in the first one is happening in the second one, because they're happening at the same time, and that's quite fun. But it also kind of does affect in terms of characters you meet who appear in the first, whichever you pick, and play a big role in it, and then at the start of the second one you pick are kind of unceremoniously killed off screen. But of course, because that happens in either of them the first time, they're just people you don't know who are killed off screen, and it doesn't really matter. But then in the second one, you're like, oh no, I know those characters, I like those characters. And it makes you think about in the first one, oh, those were these characters that I'm experiencing now. So it's a very, very interesting story. I don't think you could ever do something like it. Like, you could only really tell this kind of a story with that gimmick of doing the two at the same time. But I enjoyed it as a little experiment, and I enjoyed all of these stories, all four of them. They were all very different. They all had some, not necessarily, I think calling them gimmicks can be a bit like dismissive, but they are gimmicky, but that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. I really enjoyed all of these stories. A really strong batch. Yeah, I would recommend any of these, especially if you're looking for something a bit different. I think this is really proof of just how kind of experimental Big Finish could be in the early days. I know a lot of people talk about how experimental Big Finish were in the early days, and these four stories are a testament to that, because, you know, you just don't get stories like this very often, and I loved all of them. But those are my thoughts. Next time, in the next video, we're going to be looking at the next 3 stories, which, if you're familiar with the main range, you will know are collectively the Villains trilogy: Omega, Davros, Master. These are 3 stories that are very, very highly regarded. I'm very intrigued. So yes, I will see you next time for those 3, and then after that, of course, the big 5-0, which will get its own video all on its own. But yes, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you like Doctor Who. If you like ASMR. If you like Big Finish. And I will see you in the next video.